Hey, how's it going, guys? Drew Creal here. In this video, what I wanted to do is talk about just kind of the two general paths that guitar players find themselves kind of confronted with in life. I'm just here to share my perspective. There's a lot of other great YouTube channels out there where guys are talking about what it's like to be a guitar player in Nashville, what it's like to play downtown and play for artists, and there's even session musician channels, and I think all of that stuff is great, but I think I have a pretty unique perspective and I wanted to share it on my channel since I've lived in Nashville since 2012. But these are just some general thoughts I've had about some of the choices that you have to make as a guitar player if you want to be a professional musician in Nashville, for example, right? So the two paths that I'm talking about are being a gigging guitar player. So that's going to be someone who plays cover tunes downtown on Broadway, or maybe even traveling and playing some gigs regionally. You might even find yourself playing for an up-and-coming artist or even a famous artist. And there are pros and cons associated with making that choice, okay? The other side of that is to be what I would call a creative guitar player, which is kind of what I do on YouTube. So I consider myself an artist in and of myself and with the bands that I play in. It's just a different bag of pros and cons when it comes to being a creative guitar player. So what I want to break down with you in this video is just the pros and cons of each, and hopefully help you make a decision for yourself if you're a younger guitar player or you're a pro. Maybe you want to switch to doing something else. That's why I wanted to make this video. I have some knowledge that I think some people might want to hear, so that's what this video is all about. So first and foremost, neither one of these paths is better than the other. It's just a different set of circumstances, and I'm not here to argue with like, well, creative guitar players are better than gigging guitar players. I think both of these pursuits in music are very noble, and you can expect in most cases to have a pretty humble lifestyle, even if you're a successful metal guitar player that tours the world, or a gigging guitar player that plays in Nashville, Tennessee and does some traveling playing guitar. I think you can expect most of the time to have a pretty humble lifestyle. I would say that's probably around $100,000 or less per year in terms of what you would expect to earn, although there are outliers that earn a lot more. First I want to talk about the gigging guitar players, and I have several friends that play downtown in Nashville multiple nights a week. They post on Facebook all the time. They seem to be having a great time. They seem to be making money, and I'm just going to share my thoughts on that and some of the pros and cons that I see. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be interviewing some of these guys. Some of these guys are my friends on my other channel, which is called Shred Sessions, where we'll be talking about this at length, and I'll be throwing questions at these guys. But in this video, I'm just going to try to break it down as plainly and as clearly as I see it. Gonna keep scratching your head? So first I want to talk about the positives, being a gigging guitar player. And I think the main thing is that you're gonna have the guitar in your hands for hours and hours a day, multiple nights a week, or when you're working. So typically a set on Broadway is about 4 hours, and you're gonna be standing there playing a lot of top 40 tunes, and you're gonna be expected to know a volume of songs. I would say anywhere from 500 to 1,000 songs. And there are like Dropbox folders with charts, and you really do have to know number charts to play a lot of these tunes. You're going to be throwing a lot of curveballs at you, new tunes that you might not know about, that you've never played before, that you're going to be expected to play on the spot in that moment on stage. And I think what that does to a guitar player is it makes you a literal badass. It makes you a great guitar player if you have the backbone to stand up there and do this night after night and put on a great show, hold a guitar in your hands, jump around stage, and just kick ass playing tunes. And I have a lot of respect for my friends that do this. You're going to keep your chops up. You're going to be playing some of the greatest guitar solos of all time. You're going to be improvising over chord changes. In addition to that, you're going to be playing with some of the best musicians on the planet who are right here in Nashville. So I think those are just right off the bat some really great reasons to want to play downtown on Broadway. Generally speaking, there's going to be a lot of eyes on you. So there's going to be people from all over the world, from all walks of life, coming to these bars to watch real live music played by Nashville musicians, which if you go anywhere in the world and you compare Nashville musicians to some of the other cities, I gotta be honest, man, we've got the cream of the crop here. And that's not to discredit any other music scenes in other cities. I'm sure there's great stuff happening. When it comes to Nashville, I think we've got some of the greatest musicians in the world, maybe second to some of the New York jazz scenes. Like, those guys are also superhuman. If you can play, jazz guitar every night, I'm very impressed with that. Generally speaking, at these bars, people are there to have a good time. The vibe is high. You can feed off of other people's energy. Generally speaking, it's just a good hang. It's a good place to be. It's a good place to work, night after night. Some other pros would be you do get a free meal and some drink tickets when you're playing at these clubs in downtown Nashville, which is nice. You're going to be constantly making connections with other musicians and other people that might be there to just watch you play. You're going to be in center stage and people are going to be interested in what you're doing. It's a great place to be if you want to network and you want to meet other people in the music industry or in people of other industries as well. So along with that, making connections, if you're looking for other musicians to start a band with or to do something serious in music, you can find a lot of great musicians that are in that gigging scene. The hard part that I find is getting people out of the gigging scene and doing something that's more of a passion project. I have crashed and burned with multiple musicians that are in that scene, and that's no hard feelings to those guys. There seems to be a shortage of drummers and bass players that want to be a part of the creative side of music in Nashville. So if you are a drummer or a bass player, I think you're going to have a little bit easier time getting gigs than the guitar players and singers potentially, just because you're more of a utility musician and you can be more interchangeable. Whereas lead vocalists and guitar players, they kind of set the vibe of that particular band that is playing on that given night. So all that to say, there's a lot of connections that you can make. Those connections can lead to bigger opportunities. You can find yourself playing for an up-and-coming artist. You can find yourself playing for, a famous artist. You can find yourself getting tour offers and even offers to play on people's sessions. It's just the ultimate networking thing. If you're down there on Broadway and you're bumping into different musicians and different people in that music scene that is centered around, popular music, country, rap, and rock, and pop. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so let's get into some of the cons of being a Broadway musician. So, number one, the environment that you're in has the potential to be very stressful. So, it's fun to go to a bar with your friends, but I don't think it's as fun to work at a bar as it is to go there and drink at the bar. That might be an obvious one. You're going to be around a lot of alcohol and potentially drugs. I have heard of there being a lot of cocaine and other drugs that kind of get passed around in Nashville. And if you have a problem with addiction, or you have maybe a previous problem with addiction, it's probably not a good environment for you to be in, night after night playing music on Broadway in Nashville, where they're pouring drinks, they're slinging beers left and right. It's really hard to avoid unless you have the willpower of a god. There's also the potential for violence, and danger in some of these bars. You've got people from all walks of life, from all over the world. You throw a few hundred of them into a bar, you get them extremely drunk and get them dancing around, listening to music. There's always things that happen at these bars. People get in fights. There's people that throw up. There's just a lot of really bad things that can happen. And I think you have to ask yourself, am I willing to be around that on a regular basis? Is that going to be good for my mental health? And is that the kind of work environment that I want to be involved in? Another thing to consider is you're going to be standing on stage for 4 hours a night minimum. If you have 2 sets, that's 8 hours a night, where you're standing up there on stage. There might be a break halfway through your set, but you're standing on stage with a guitar that's pretty heavy. Guitars weigh between like 7 and 14 pounds, you know, and you've got this thing strapped on you. You're expected to be an entertainer. You're expected to put on a great show, to engage with the audience. You're expected to stand up there and rock out and put on a great show. You have to ask yourself, you know, is that something that I want to do? And my take on it is that is not a normal amount of time to be on stage putting on a show, 4 hours at a time. It's just, that's a lot of energy being expended. And if you do that 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week, it's going to take its toll on your body and possibly your mental health. The next con that I wanted to talk about is transportation. If you're going to be playing multiple nights a week down on Broadway, you're going to have to commute into the city. If you don't already live there, you know, Nashville is really expensive to live downtown. It's going to be at least $2,500 a month to get a decent apartment in the downtown area. So most musicians that I know, they don't live down there. So they have to drive downtown and, you know, use a parking garage, which can cost $100 to $300 a month to rent a spot in a parking garage. Another option would be to use Lyft and Uber. So, you know, that could be, you know, anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 bucks each way to get down to Broadway and to get back. So transportation is going to be a huge issue and expense if you want to be a gigging musician in Nashville. Another thing to consider is that you're going to be carrying your guitar a couple blocks walking down the streets of Nashville. And if you're doing this late at night, there's a possibility that someone might want to take your guitar. They might want to see if you have some cash on you. They might want to mess with you. And I've heard stories of guitar players getting mugged and getting their wad of cash stolen from them after a gig, which to me, that's devastating stuff. So that's another thing you got to just think about if you want to get into this gigging situation. The next con that I have is the low pay. Okay, so if you want to be a gigging guitar player in Broadway, Nashville, you're going to probably make about $150 a set. Okay, so that's a 4-hour set. That's playing, you know, dozens and dozens of songs. $150 is the base pay typically. I've even heard it being $75 base pay, which is what I think it used to be. I've heard other situations where base pay is like $250. It's not very much money for the amount of time that I think you're standing up there playing music. Now, you additionally can get some tips, okay? And in the summertime, when Nashville is just going full bore, and you're playing, you know, 5 nights a week, you can make in tips, you know, anywhere from like $300 to like $1,000 a night in tips if you are playing on like a peak night where the bar is at capacity all night long. I've heard stories of that where guys are walking out with $1,000 cash. I think that's great. So the potential for the pay to be really high is there, but I think it's just during the main tourist months, you know, during CMA week, during like the Americana week, and just all the different festival weeks that happen in the summer. I think you can make a killing down there playing guitar, but generally speaking, the pay is pretty low. And if you think you're getting paid in cash under the table, you're not. Most of the band leaders that I've heard about downtown Nashville, they 1099 all of their musicians. So you do have to pay Uncle Sam, you know, his fair share of the tip money and of your earnings that you make while playing live music on Broadway. That's just part of the deal. We'll see what happens in the coming months with Trump as president, who says that he's going to take he's not going to tax tips anymore, and he wants to get rid of income tax. Like, we'll see if that actually happens. But generally speaking, you're going to expect to pay taxes on your earnings that you make while playing down on Broadway. So I know I'm referencing a lot of Broadway scenarios in this discussion, but I found that the pay is similar when you're playing for an up-and-coming artist and you're maybe doing a weekend warrior type situation. You are probably going to be offered, you know, $200 to maybe $300 to $500 a gig when you're doing a weekend run, which would be like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday. If you're, you know, traveling in a Sprinter van with a small band, that's typically what musicians make, is right around $250 for the gig. You play the set, you go home. You might get a per diem. You might get like 30 or 50 bucks for food and snacks and stuff like that. But that is generally what musicians get paid when they go and play for artists out on the road, and you do a little bit of a road gig. Of course, it can go up from there. If you're playing for a major artist, you might make $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 a night. There's the potential for that to happen, but from the conversations I've had with professional touring musicians, that is around what you make, $250, maybe $500 a night. And you got to consider, how much time am I spending traveling from point A to point B? I'm picking up my life and I'm getting in a van. How much time am I spending from the time I get in the van from the time that I get home? Could that time be used in other ways, like potentially on a creative guitar pursuit? So I'll just throw that out there. These are questions I had to ask myself years ago, and for me, I decided to not do that. I didn't want to play top 40 tunes, and that lifestyle just wasn't interesting to me. Okay, so the last con that I want to discuss with being a gigging musician is the music itself. You're going to be playing top 40 tunes from the past like 5 or 6 decades. You're going to be playing the great rock songs, the great pop songs of all the eras, and you're going to have to play a huge volume of music. Okay, now that's if you're doing the cover scene. If you are a traveling, sideman or gigging musician, you're going to be playing music that might not be your favorite style, okay? There is some artists that are out there touring and playing that I think are just straight up whack. Like, it's music that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. There's nothing interesting at all with it. I know I can be very opinionated when it comes to music, but there's just some god-awful music out there that people are playing and they're touring on, and they're paying their musicians. And if you have to ask yourself, is the music I'm playing any good? Okay, and do I want to be up there every night playing a show alongside an artist that I don't really believe in, or that I think is whack, or like, that's just something to think about, man. Like, you have to really like the music that you're playing every night. And in fact, the rule in Nashville is you got to have 2 of 3 things. You got to have good music, good hangs, and good pay. And if you have 2 of those 3 things, you've got a great gig. That's something you gotta think about. I know people have talked about that on every YouTube channel, every Nashville YouTube channel that there is, but I wanted to yet again throw that in there. So ask yourself, do I want to play top 40 music? Do I want to play someone else's passion project? That might be a no for you. It's definitely a hard no for me. I want to make original music that contributes to the world, okay? And when I die, I want to know that I created something that will live longer than I will, okay? And if you're playing cover tunes for a large portion of your life in your younger years, in my opinion, you're not really contributing anything to yourself or to the world. So just take that for what it is. I know you're contributing to great times for people when they come and visit Nashville. There's definitely something noble and awesome about that. I just think you're better off contributing something creatively in your lifetime. I think that's a better use of your time on planet Earth. So we'll just leave it at that. All right, so what we're going to talk about next are the pros and cons of being a creative guitar player. So this is going to be a guitar player that writes and records their own music. Maybe you have a band that you're working with. It's the creative angle at things. You could also be a YouTuber like me, and you also make music. Let's start off with the pros of choosing this path. If you're living in Nashville or you're living in a guitar-centric city, if you will. The number one thing that I like about this is you're in control of what you create. Unless you're creating with other people, hopefully you're creating music with like-minded individuals, but you literally get to decide the type of music that you make. If you want to make, cerebral, technical, brutal, blackened Christian death metal, which is what I make, you can do that. You can craft your own sound and create music that is authentically you. And I think that that is amazing, okay? And I think that's what the world needs more of, is authenticity. people sharing their point of view, their worldview, and their message in their music. I think that that is the most compelling thing that you could do if you are a talented musician or guitar player. Another pro is that you get to work on your own timeline. So you get to write, record, and release music pretty much whenever you want. You can create your own strategy with this. You create your own content stream. You're in charge of the ship here, and you can steer it in whatever direction that you want. Another con is you get to build your own team. You're not on a curated list of artists that the record label put together or that the artist put together. You are in a collective band where everyone is a contributor, hopefully, right? And you are, working with a group of people that you're not only friends with, but you're also musical companions and co-writers with. Like, I just think that that way of doing music is fantastic, man. If you can find a group of people that you get along with and you create a vision for your band, I think you're going to have a much easier time getting in the van, picking up your guitar, and going on the road and playing your songs if everyone in the band believes in what they're doing. You're going to get to practice with your band regularly. You're going to get to hone your craft and your sound and create your own unique live show that's different from anybody else's. The other thing to consider is that you may not even have to play a live show for a long period of time. You can leverage social media as you write and record your music and put out visual content. There's just so much that you could do in an original band or being an original artist. You can kind of curate what you want people to see before they see you play live. And in fact, there's several bands that I can reference in the metal scene, one being Lorna Shore and the other one being Shadow of Intent. These are bands that didn't play live shows for a long period of time, but they put music out for years, and then when it came time to play live, they had already built their following, and all of these people came to their shows. And I would say that those two bands are some of the most extreme metal bands that you could even imagine, and they have been able to create a career for themselves, and they seem to be doing very well. And I just think that people oftentimes sell themselves short and don't think that the sound that they have could ever be marketable or popular. But if you use your resources and you connect with people online, you can actually build your own following, which is something that I'm trying to do here on this channel. What I'm going to talk about now are the cons of being a creative musician, and I'll kind of use more examples from the metal scene, which is kind of what I'm involved in. And the first thing that comes to mind is that there are a lot of other bands and a lot of other musicians that are trying to do the same exact thing as you. There's so much heaviness in the metal world. There's so many great heavy bands, and there's only so many eyeballs. So it can feel like there's so many bands that are trying to reach the same exact people over and over again, and the audience isn't growing. I do want to mention a video that I saw recently from Dean Lamb, the guitar player of Archspire. He has a YouTube channel. He recently put out a video where he talks about the metal music scene and how it's growing, and I totally agree with him. I feel like metal music today is like jazz was in the 1940s and 50s. Like, everybody was listening to jazz during that time, and the genre itself was exploding, and there were all of these other forms of jazz that were coming out during that time period. That's kind of what is happening in metal today. There are more fans, there are more types of metal music, there are more scenes. I think people want this visceral, brutal, heavy, interesting style of music. Go check out Dean's video. He kind of breaks it down, how, the scene is growing, and there is a lot of potential for artists to actually make money as metal musicians these days. Another con is that creating content regularly for YouTube and Instagram and your music is difficult, and it's time consuming. So it is difficult to have a schedule where you're releasing music, especially if you have a full-time job. It's really hard to put content out on a regular basis. But I think if you're passionate enough about your music and your band and what you're working on, you will definitely find time to put content out. And if you're not putting content out, maybe you don't want it as bad as you think you do. I'll just throw that out there. Okay, the next con that I want to discuss for being a creative musician is that it is expensive. So you're going to need to have a full-time job unless you're a trust fund kid or something like that. But you're going to need to leverage your income to afford a few things. And it might even be less things and less expense than you might imagine. But if you are in an up-and-coming metal band or psych rock band or whatever, you may want to invest in an in-ear monitoring system, and those can be very expensive. They can be thousands of dollars. Of course, you know, the cost of our instruments and amplifiers. If you want to sound good on stage, it's usually good. It's a good idea to have high-quality equipment. So all of these things can add up, and you can sink literally like tens of thousands of dollars into a band if you're not careful. But what I think you need to do is have like a financial meeting with your band and decide what it is that you actually need to put on a live show. Maybe you don't need an in-ear monitoring system, right? Maybe the drummer just needs to run a click track in their ears and the other musicians can play off of them. Monitoring is a huge issue with metal music because of the intensity and the brutality of the sound. It's usually good for all of the musicians to have a click in their ear so they can hear what part of the song they're on. Getting an in-ear monitoring system, I think, is kind of crucial, but you may be able to get by without it. And so that's why I would say be really careful with your finances and don't overspend like I did several years ago. So take that for what it's worth. Okay, the last con that I'll discuss for being a creative musician is getting buy-in from the other members of your band. So what I mean by buy-in is everyone else in the band motivated to do this music that you've decided to do, even when the vibes aren't right, even when like maybe the morale is low and the vibe is low? If you want to make it in music, you have to keep pressing on. Okay, you have to keep deciding to practice and decide to do it. Okay, it's not just the feelings that you get after a great successful show. Those only last so long. Getting buy-in from other musicians can be difficult, okay? If it's original music that just you are writing, finding other musicians that are just as stoked to play it live is going to be hard. And it's especially hard to find musicians that are gigging musicians that would want to play your music, especially if you're a new artist or an up-and-coming artist. Finding people that you get along with that are just as motivated as you and are fully committed to the cause of creating, writing, recording music, playing live shows. It's difficult to find those people, but they're out there. So put yourself out there, go to local shows that are a part of your scene, connect with other people, and I'm sure you'll find somebody that you really vibe with that wants to go on the journey with you. Well, there you go, guys. That is my video on the two paths that guitar players often find themselves in. And I think just to close it out, you got to ask yourself, like, where do you want to spend your life? You know, how do you want to use your time? Do you want to play a million gigs? Do you want to play top 40 tunes? Or do you want to spend your resources and your time trying to create something new? Do you want to die with a legacy of music, whether it's popular or not? You know, these are questions you got to ask yourself. And I know where I stand on this thing. You know, you're free to make up your mind, but, you know, let me know in the comments what you thought of my thoughts on this topic. Maybe there's another path that I'm not thinking of. Drop something in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on this thing. And I'll talk to you guys soon. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.